Hi, this is Gary Marco and Jason Mahr. We're here with myfreedomjourney.com, and we're going to continue with talking about what we did in our last podcast, which is about self-identity. And something wonderful happened along the way between our two podcasts, and I'll let Jason share.
Yeah, because a lot of the conversation that we have about healing and personal growth is, you know, you've been healed. You know, you're in a different spot when you come across the same temptations, you come across the same things that you went through before, but you choose a different response this time. Now, I guess the caveat with that is it could be a worse response. That would be a sign of not having healing, but when you choose a different positive response, that's really what we're aiming for.
Yeah. It's a great victory.
Because life doesn't stop, right? So you can go through a healing journey, you can gain some freedom, but the old man's going to come knocking on the door every once in a while. And I had an experience this past week with dealing with some of that and realizing through some awareness, and that's what we want to talk about in this podcast, is just the awareness piece. Because when you go through healing, you have to be aware of yourself. You have a new identity. You find a new identity in who you are, but you have to be aware too of what the old self was like.
Oh yeah.
And when Gary and I were meeting, we were talking about that early on in the journey, that this was going to happen. It was just, hey, newsflash, the journey goes like this. It goes up and down. Yeah. And so what are you going to do when the old man shows up? And he had a great illustration to help me, a visual illustration about the 275 loop that we talked about before.
The 275 loop, and we talked about it before. This is just a reminder that, and I was talking to my daughter about this just yesterday, so it's interesting. I was talking to her about it too, but that you've got to find something to change the cyclical pattern of how you're thinking. And if you're stuck in the cycle, it's best to try to think of something that's exactly opposite or opposite of that, and focus on that for a while. So if you're on the loop that goes around your city, as an example, and you can imagine that, what you want to do is actually get off the next exit. But you really have to imagine it in super detail. You have to feel yourself being in the car and taking the exit and turning on your blinker and stopping at the light. And then after you take your right-hand turn, seeing what's around in that area, what restaurants, where are you going, and actually imagine all of that. And literally within a minute or two, you're now thinking about something totally different than you were before. And the better you get at it, you'll start thinking of something different as soon as you hit the exit.
Yeah.
So, and what was really interesting is Jason and I were communicating about something completely unrelated, and I hadn't talked to Jason in a little while, so I didn't know what was going on in his life. So why don't you share that?
Yeah, we showed up to do the podcast, and Gary walks in the door, and I'm like, I'm glad you're here, because we need to talk, because life has been really tough this week, and it's just one of those weeks where spiritually, emotionally, physically, things just seem to be not clicking.
Right.
And I found myself in a place where I could see the old man starting to creep in again. And I was going through a situation here recently where I kind of felt like on the outside looking in of my peer group, of my professional group, and I could see things moving forward in a certain pace, and feeling like I wasn't really being involved in it.
Yeah.
And while I have dreams and aspirations of things I want to do, no matter where I'm at, I want to be a team player. I want to be involved. So feeling like I was on the outside left me feeling, it kind of put me in that victim seat that we've talked about. And I just confessed. I said, honestly, I've spent a couple of days sitting in that victim seat. Then the first words out of your mouth was what?
That's not a good place for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I found myself sitting there in the victim seat and just feeling like, woe is me.
Yeah.
Things aren't working out the way that I want them to. And it from a physical standpoint, it made me depressed. I honestly felt like I could sleep all day.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get out of bed. I wasn't motivated to help at home. And just wondering why in the world am I feeling this way? Why am I doing this? And then the thing that triggered me was, go ahead.
So you put on the victim hat,
Yeah.
but you didn't realize you put the victim hat on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's how easily this sort of stuff can just creep up on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, well, it normally shows up when I'm doing this, and then before you know it, it's going to show up somewhere else.
Yeah.
And kind of weave itself back into your life. So the key part of this is he did not know that he was in that chair. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
And usually realize it when you're sitting there thinking, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. I don't know if you've ever been there before. I find myself there occasionally. And whenever you think you're right and everybody else is, you're probably in that lazy boy sofa, that cozy victim seat that we talked about before, and it does not work. I'm just saying, it doesn't work. So one of the things that really triggered me into snapping out of it, Gary sent me an email. I'm allowed to share that. He sent me an email. We were talking about what we're going to do with the podcast, and there were just a couple of sentences of encouragement. And that's really what it was encouragement. But when I read it, I thought, is that some kind of backhanded comment he's making towards me? And it totally wasn't. If you read the email, it totally wasn't. But it was me sitting in the victim seat, feeling like everybody was out to get me.
Everyone's attacking you, yeah.
Gary shows up in an email saying something totally benign. And I thought, wait a minute, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? And it was because I was in that woe is me pattern. Now, having been through the training, having been through the coaching, I knew what to do to get myself out of that. And that's been the key ultimately to freedom, has been using that as a tool in your bag, knowing when it shows up, how quickly you can get back on the right path. Not that I was on the wrong path, but I could have been. I could have been veering that way. It was just a couple of those lazy days.
And keep in mind, the goal is not to completely throw out the victim hat. That would be great, but the chances of that actually happening are remote. Mm-hmm. It's maybe losing the victim hat so it's harder to find, and then resizing it so it's so small it won't stay on your head.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I can move through this more quickly. Now, what I want people to hear is that some people would look at this as an extreme negative. Oh my goodness, I almost fell back to old behaviors, and here I am beating myself up again and wearing the victim hat. Mm-hmm. And what we're really doing is celebrating a victory.
Yeah.
Because there was a difference in how he dealt with the same issue.
Whenever I get to that place where I felt like I was a victim and I felt like everybody was out to get me, it would really, from a science standpoint, it does something to your brain. Now, We're not going to get into all those details because we'll get to that in a future podcast. But your brain's always trying to seek some sort of level. So when you feel down, it's seeking something to and even if you're super high, it's looking to come back to level, because you can't stay that way all the time, and you can't stay low either. So my drug of choice was pornography. That's what I would do. That was my I didn't do heroin. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. It was pornography. And I even remember this past week having a conversation with my wife, like, hey, this is actually pretty cool where I'm at, because I can remember feeling this way before, and my response to it would be to go do something destructive. Something to try to excite myself or to boost those chemical levels in the brain. And this time around, I feel it. I can feel it more physically,
Right.
because I'm not going to the user side of it. But the physical impact is an awareness piece of, hey, I need to get out of this seat,
Right.
and I need to focus on positive things. So,
And that helped you get out. And it's interesting the way you just put that, because it reminded me of a friend that I used to have, where back in the day, right after college, we spent a lot of time going out and drinking. His response to his hangover, because he was feeling bad and beat up, was to go and buy stuff. And he'd go out and buy a car, or he'd go out and buy something super expensive after he went out drinking. And it seemed like he always had this urge to go do that. Well, he would get some sort of high or, surge that would help him feel better because he was hungover. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the solution would be, well, don't drink so much to get hungover. But it may have taken a while for him to get to a point where he actually had a realization of, wow, these things are in some way connected, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about, we're not going to go into great detail, but it's about dopamine. And dopamine is the reward drug. So hormone. So when you're feeling down, it helps make you feel better or more balanced. So that's kind of what was going on.
And it also works too in the brain for healthy things too.
Yeah.
It's the brain telling you, like when you do something great, if you go for a run or you exercise, there's dopamine released in the brain, and it's saying, hey, let's do this again.
Yeah, good job.
So there's natural ways of experiencing dopamine. There's artificial ways.
Yeah.
And we know from science now that pornography is like a drug, and there's
very much so.
It is a unnatural release of dopamine in the brain, and for me and for most people who are struggling with that, the brain was simply saying, let's do that again.
Right.
However, you don't get the same high, the next time, and it can take you down a very, very destructive pathway. So whatever it is for you, it could be eating, it could be buying a car. Now, I never had the kind of money I could just go out and buy a car.
Neither did I.
If that's your issue, you send some checks our way. But we, knowing the signs, knowing who you are, because I literally sat there when I got the email and I read it and I went, I had to say to myself, I am not this person. This is not who I am. I had to say these things to myself, and the I am statements are very key in the midst of awareness, because you can say things to yourself that are completely destructive, or you can say things to yourself that are constructive, that can build you up.
Right.
So I had to say to myself, I'm not that person anymore. Now, if I say something negative, and you might know some of those Debbie Downers that are around you all the time. They always have something negative to say about themselves. Sometimes my kids do it too, and I always remind them, hey, you're going to get exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
If you believe that you are that way, you're going to be that way.
It's very true.
So if you can believe that you are something different, you can be that way as well. So knowing you've going through the same thing and choosing a different response, and like we said before, you can choose a negative response. I could have chosen this time around to go, well, pornography's bad, so I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is something else. I'm going to
go drinking, or I'm going to, do whatever. Yeah. So he chose the better response versus the poor response. So that's our lesson for today, our podcast, whatever you want to call it. We're going to continue on the subject of self-identity in the next podcast, because we think it's very important, and I really think it'll help free some people up. So I'm Gary Marco.
And this is Jason Mahr.
And we're with myfreedomjourney.com. Check us out. Have a good day.
You too.